They say the lantern guides the lost, but here it...
The steel door slammed behind me, and suddenly the screaming became muffled, distant, almost dreamlike. My keycard still trembled in my hand, blood smeared across its magnetic strip from the guy who'd grabbed my arm topside. I stood in the fluorescent-lit concrete corridor, chest heaving, and listened to my own breathing echo off walls that smelled like machine oil and decades of accumulated dust. Above me, footsteps thundered across the midway, not running, shuffling, dragging, the sound you make when your body doesn't quite remember how legs work anymore. I'd been working maintenance at Wonderland Park for 11 years, knew every inch of the tunnel system that snaked beneath the 200-acre property like a concrete root system. Most guests never suspected these passages existed. Designed in the 1970s so workers could move supplies, access utility stations, and reach attraction basements without breaking the magical illusion above ground. The engineers had created something remarkable. Miles of interconnected corridors, service rooms, storage facilities, and access shafts that formed a complete shadow version of the park above. Right now, that invisible world was the only reason I still had a pulse. The outbreak hit during peak summer season. Over 15,000 guests packed into the park that Saturday afternoon, and the temperature had climbed to 98 degrees. I was underground replacing a hydraulic pump for the Cyclone roller coaster when I heard the first genuine screams, not the delighted shrieks from the rides, but something primal that made my stomach clench and my hands freeze on the wrench I'd been turning. The sound carried through the ventilation system, amplified and distorted, bouncing off concrete until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. By the time I climbed the access ladder to investigate, the midway had transformed into something from a nightmare I couldn't process. People tearing into each other with hands and teeth. Blood mixing with spilled soda on the pavement, creating pink rivers between the cobblestones. A security guard I knew, Marcus, who always shared his lunch and complained about his bad knee, stumbling toward me with his jaw hanging at an angle that defied every principle of human anatomy, bone visible through torn flesh. I ran, not proud of it, just honest, dropped back down that ladder, sealed the hatch above me with shaking hands, and started moving through the tunnels on pure instinct, my work boots splashing through puddles of condensation that had accumulated over decades. That was 7 months ago. If you've ever felt the weight of being the only person who knows the way out, who understands the map everyone else can't see, you'll understand why I'm still breathing. Stay with me through this, hit that like button, and subscribe because this story goes places I still have nightmares about. The tunnel system stretched for miles beneath Wonderland. Main arteries ran beneath each themed section of the park. Adventureland with its jungle aesthetics, Future World with its chrome and neon, Frontier Junction with its Old West facades, Neptune's Cove with its water attractions. Smaller capillaries branched off to individual attractions, maintenance rooms, storage facilities, and utility stations. Some tunnels dated back to the park's original 1968 construction, narrow passages with exposed pipes and crumbling concrete. Others had been added during expansions in the 80s and 90s, wider and better lit, with color-coded pipes and modern electrical systems. I'd memorized the layout years ago, back when the biggest worry was getting lost during a double shift or accidentally walking into a restricted area. Now that knowledge represented the difference between survival and becoming one of those shuffling things topside. My first week underground played out in a fog of disbelief and survival instinct. I survived on protein bars from my lunchbox and water from the maintenance break room sink, rationing each meal like it might be my last because I genuinely didn't know how long this would last or what came next. The tunnels maintained stable temperatures year-round, around 65 degrees thanks to geothermal effects and the insulation provided by tons of earth and concrete, and the backup generators kept minimal lighting operational. Every few hours, they'd kick on with a diesel rumble that vibrated through the floors, and emergency lighting would illuminate the corridors in harsh white fluorescence that made everything look sterile and abandoned. I could hear them above me constantly, thousands of feet pacing the midways, wandering through attraction queues, bumping against ride barriers. The sounds filtered down through ventilation grates, through the thin points where maintenance shafts connected to attraction basements, through the old drainage pipes that ran from surface to sewer. Sometimes I'd be directly beneath the carousel, and I'd hear them stepping on the platform, making the mechanism creak under collective weight never intended for stationary loads. The Calliope music had stopped on day 2, the power grid above ground failing in sections, but my brain supplied the melody anyway, creating a soundtrack that felt obscene against the backdrop of what Wonderland had become. I established my first base in Tunnel Junction C7 beneath the Thunderbolt roller coaster. The maintenance hub there included a break room with a couch that smelled like decades of workers' sweat and spilled coffee, a small kitchenette with a microwave and mini-fridge, and most importantly, a steel door with an internal deadbolt that looked like it could withstand serious force. I pushed a tool cabinet against that door anyway, the metal screaming against concrete as I shoved it into place, then a second one, then a stack of industrial paint buckets that weighed 30 pounds each. Overkill, probably, but I slept better hearing the scrape of metal on concrete, reminding me of the barriers between me and them, the layers of protection I'd built between my sleeping body and the nightmare world that had consumed everything I'd known. The infected couldn't work doors, couldn't problem solve or plan or demonstrate any of the higher cognitive functions that separated humans from animals. But they could hear, and they remembered spaces in some primitive way, drawn back to locations where they'd heard sound or movement. I learned that the hard way on day 9 when I accessed the storage room beneath the Pirate's plunge water ride. The metal staircase leading down made a distinctive clang with each step, the sound ringing through the enclosed space like a bell. I'd grown careless after a week of silence, stopped being cautious about noise. When I emerged 40 minutes later with a cart full of canned goods from the restaurant supply depot, 20-pound cans of tomato sauce, industrial-sized containers of pasta, enough food to last weeks, I found 12 of them clustered around the park bench directly above my exit hatch, drawn by the sound like moths to flame. Had to wait 6 hours in that stairwell, sitting in the dark with my hand over my mouth to quiet my breathing, listening to them shuffle and bump against the hatch above. My legs cramped. My back spasmed. I counted the rivets in the metal stairs, 347 visible from my position, and recited every song lyric I could remember, just to keep my mind occupied and prevent panic from overwhelming rational thought. They dispersed finally as dawn approached, wandering off toward some stimulus I couldn't identify, and I crawled back to Junction C7 with shaking hands and a new appreciation for how quickly carelessness could kill. After that incident, I moved like a ghost through my underground domain, mapped out which hatches opened into secluded areas, behind dumpsters, inside maintenance sheds, beneath attraction platforms where the infected rarely wandered. Timed my surface excursions for the hours just before dawn, when the infected seemed most sluggish, most dormant, their movements slowing like machines running low on fuel. I wrapped tools in cloth to silence them, carried WD-40 for every hinge, learned which sections of tunnel ran directly beneath attractions with basements I could access without going topside at all. The Haunted Mansion, the Space Mountain Simulator, the underground portion of the log flume all had substantial basement areas that connected to the tunnel system and contained supplies, equipment, and most importantly, alternative routes that kept me away from surface exposure. The food situation stabilized once I realized the scale of available supplies and got over my initial paralysis. Wonderland had 15 full-service restaurants, 30 snack stands, and massive storage facilities designed to feed thousands of guests daily throughout the peak summer season. The commissary tunnel alone stretched for 200 yards, lined with industrial refrigerators, freezers, and dry goods storage that could stock a small grocery store. Most of the perishables rotted in the first weeks. The smell seeping down through ventilation grates made me gag, forcing me to wear a maintenance respirator when I ventured near affected areas. But the dry goods, canned items, and frozen foods in the industrial freezers remained viable. The freezers operated on backup power, maintaining temperature as long as the generators held, and I'd found enough frozen meat, vegetables, and prepared foods to last years if properly rationed. I spent 2 weeks methodically shuttling supplies from the main commissary tunnel to strategic cache points throughout my underground territory, building redundancy in case I got cut off from any single location. Junction C7 got the bulk of supplies. My primary base deserved primary resources. But I established secondary caches in Junction F9 beneath the shooting gallery, in the utility room under Neptune's Cove, in the old 1960s section beneath what used to be the original park entrance. Each cache contained enough food, water, and equipment to sustain me for 2 weeks minimum. I organized everything with the same methodical precision I'd used for maintenance work. Labeled, dated, inventoried in a notebook I'd found in the break room. Water was never an issue. The park's infrastructure included its own water treatment system, processing from municipal lines and maintaining throughout the property. The tunnels housed dozens of access points, maintenance sinks, emergency eyewash stations, utility hookups for cleaning equipment. I tested the water quality using chemical strips from the pool maintenance supplies. pH balanced, chlorine within acceptable ranges, safe for consumption. Power remained the critical concern. The backup generators ran on propane, and while the park maintained substantial reserves in the tank farm near the employee parking area, I knew those tanks would eventually empty. Basic math told me that 7 1,000-gallon tanks, each lasting approximately 60 days at current consumption rates, gave me just over a year before the lights went out permanently. I began rationing electricity immediately, keeping only essential corridor lights active, spending most of my time in darkness, navigating by touch and memory, and the dim glow of my maintenance flashlight. The darkness pressed against my eyes like physical weight, but I adapted. Learned to count steps between junctions, to identify tunnels by the sound my footsteps made on different types of flooring, to navigate by temperature variations and air current patterns. The human brain adapts remarkably when survival demands it. Isolation pressed against my skull like atmospheric pressure, building slowly but inexorably until some days I felt like my head might implode from the weight of absolute solitude. I talked to myself constantly, narrating my actions to fill the silence that otherwise threatened to swallow me whole. Checking the generator levels now, Tank 3 is down to 40%. Need to switch to Tank 4 tomorrow morning. That'll give me another 8 weeks if consumption stays steady. The sound of my own voice became a lifeline, proof I still existed as something more than just another creature moving through dark spaces. I had conversations with imaginary companions, argued with myself about trivial decisions, sang every song I could remember until my throat went raw. I found the first body in Tunnel E12 during week 3, and the discovery shattered my assumption that I was the only survivor who'd made it underground. Michael Preston, according to his name tag and the ID card in his wallet. Maintenance supervisor from the night crew, a guy I'd seen around but never really talked to beyond basic work communication. He'd made it underground but had a bite on his forearm, a ragged crescent of punctures, infected and septic, the flesh around it swollen and discolored in shades of purple and green. He'd locked himself in a utility closet with a bottle of industrial cleaner, probably hoping to disinfect the wound, trying everything he could think of to stop the infection from spreading. Didn't work. His body showed the transformation halfway complete, skin mottled gray-green like spoiled meat, eyes clouded with milky film, fingernails torn off from clawing at the door in his final moments. Deep gouges in the wood where he'd tried to escape or maybe tried to keep himself contained. I found his notebook next to him, the pages water-damaged from the humidity but still legible. He documented his attempts to survive, to fight off the infection growing more incoherent with each entry as the transformation progressed. The last entry was simple, written in shaking letters that barely resembled handwriting. "I'm sorry I couldn't fight it. Don't let them get you. MP." I buried him in the dead storage area beneath the old Haunted Mansion attraction, a section of tunnel that flooded every spring and had been sealed off for years, now serving as the closest thing to consecrated ground I could offer. Dragged his body there wrapped in a maintenance tarp, dug a shallow grave in the muddy floor using a shovel from the landscaping supplies, and covered him with enough earth and debris to keep the smell contained. Said some words, though I kept them secular, just basic human decency stripped of religious framework. You deserved better than this. We all did. You tried to survive, and that counts for something. Rest now. Then I took his keycard, his flashlight, and the protein bars from his pockets, because sentiment didn't override survival and he had no use for them anymore. His notebook became my journal. I started documenting everything. Supply levels updated daily, infected movement patterns as best I could determine them from sound alone, safe routes marked and annotated, dangerous times when surface activity peaked. Created a calendar system scratched into the concrete wall of Junction C7, marking off days with a screwdriver, making tally marks that slowly accumulated like prison wall counts. The routine gave structure to existence that otherwise felt like floating in a sensory deprivation tank, days bleeding into each other without sunlight or external reference points to anchor time. The psychological weight of isolation grew heavier as weeks became months. I started having conversations with Michael's ghost, with the imagined spirits of coworkers who died topside, with versions of myself from before the outbreak. Caught myself laughing at nothing, crying over trivial losses, staring at walls for hours while my mind drifted through memories like a slideshow stuck on loop. Recognized the signs of deteriorating mental health but couldn't stop the slide. Loneliness wasn't just an emotion anymore. It was a physical presence that sat on my chest while I tried to sleep, that whispered in my ear during the endless dark hours, that slowly eroded my sense of self, until some days I couldn't remember who I'd been before the tunnels became my entire world. I know you're thinking this sounds lonely beyond comprehension, and you're absolutely right. But loneliness was about to become the least of my problems. Don't click away now. Comment below about the longest you've ever been alone, because the next part changes everything. Day 87 brought the first sign I wasn't alone down here, and the discovery would reshape everything I thought I knew about my underground existence. I was scavenging in the sub-basement of Neptune's Cove, the water park section with its wave pools and lazy rivers, hauling chlorine tablets and pool maintenance chemicals that might prove useful for water treatment or makeshift disinfectant. The space was a flooded nightmare, 6 inches of stagnant water covering the floor, my boots splashing with each step and creating ripples that spread through the darkness. The smell hit me first, algae and mildew and something organic rotting in the standing water. I'd just loaded my cart with chemical containers when I heard it. A cough. Distinctly human, distinctly alive. Not the wet, gurgling sound the infected made, but a real cough. Someone clearing their throat. My hand moved to the pry bar on my belt, the only weapon I carried, because anything louder than a whisper felt suicidal down here and I had no access to firearms. I froze, listening, counting my heartbeats as adrenaline flooded my system and made my vision sharpen. The cough came again, followed by muttered cursing, male voice, young, maybe early 20s, coming from the pump room at the far end of the corridor, maybe 30 yards away through the flooded passage. Every survival instinct I'd honed over 3 months screamed at me to leave immediately. Unknown variables equaled danger. Another person could be infected, could be dangerous, could be competition for limited resources. But a larger part of me, the part that had been talking to walls and shadows and the ghosts of dead coworkers, needed to know I wasn't the last person breathing in this underground maze. The desperate human need for connection overrode tactical caution. I approached slowly, pry bar raised and ready, placing each foot carefully to minimize splashing sounds. I'm armed. I'm coming around this corner. Don't do anything stupid and we'll both walk away from this. Silence, complete and absolute, stretching for 5 seconds, 10, 15. Then, Jesus Christ, there's someone else down here. I thought I was going crazy. Thought I'd imagined voices. The voice cracked with emotion, relief mixed with disbelief mixed with something that sounded like tears barely held in check. I rounded the corner and found him sitting on an overturned bucket, surrounded by empty food wrappers and plastic water bottles. Dozens of them, scattered across the wet floor like a garbage dump. White guy, mid-20s, wearing a soaked lifeguard uniform with a name tag that read, Tyler. His left leg was splinted with PVC pipe and duct tape, a makeshift job that looked surprisingly competent given the circumstances. He held a pipe wrench across his lap, but dropped it when he saw me, hands up in immediate surrender, tears streaming down his face and cutting tracks through the dirt accumulated on his skin. "I'm not infected," he said immediately, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I swear, I'm not infected. Look, no bites, no scratches, nothing. I've been down here since it started. Broke my leg jumping off the tidal wave platform when everything went to hell. Please don't leave. Please, I can't do this alone anymore. I thought I was the only one left. Thought I'd die down here in the dark and nobody would ever know." I studied him for a full minute, looking for the telltale signs of infection I'd memorized from careful observation of Michael's transformation. Skin discoloration, the clouded eyes, the jerky movements, the distinctive smell of rot. Tyler looked exhausted, malnourished, and desperate, but human. Completely, unmistakably human, with clear eyes and coordinated movements and the kind of emotional response the infected couldn't fake. "What's your name?" "Tyler. Tyler Breslin. I work the wave pool lifeguard duty. You're maintenance, right? I've seen you around the park. You were always fixing things, always underground. Please, man, I thought I was the only one left. I've been eating whatever I could find in the vending machines I could break into." My leg, he gestured at the makeshift splint with shaking hands. "I can't really move far. I've just been sitting here listening to them walk around up there, thinking I'd die alone in the dark. Thinking nobody would ever find me." Something inside my chest cracked open. Some dam I'd built against emotion and human connection. I'd convinced myself I was the only one, spent 3 months accepting it as immutable fact, shaped my entire existence around solitary survival. The presence of another person shattered that carefully constructed reality like a hammer through glass. "Can you walk at all?" "With support, yeah. It hurts like hell, but I can manage short distances. I've been doing laps around this section trying to keep the muscles from atrophying completely. But anything more than 50 yards and I'm done, need to rest." I made a decision that would reshape everything, choosing connection over caution in a split second of purely emotional reasoning. My base is about 20 minutes from here, maybe 30 with your leg. I've got food, clean water, medical supplies, an actual bed. We need to splint that properly, and you need real nutrition before you waste away completely. Can you make it that far? Tyler nodded so vigorously I thought his neck might snap. "I'll crawl if I have to. I'll drag myself on my stomach. Just don't leave me here. Please don't leave me here." Getting him to junction C7 took nearly an hour of slow, painful progress. He leaned heavily on my shoulder, hobbling through the corridors, occasionally gasping when weight shifted onto his injured leg and sent spikes of pain through his system. I kept us to the quietest routes, avoiding any section where our movement might echo to the surface through thin ceiling points or ventilation grates. When we finally reached my base, Tyler collapsed onto the couch and sobbed, great heaving cries that he muffled against the cushions, his whole body shaking with the release of 3 months of accumulated terror and isolation. I let him cry, started heating water for instant coffee on the small camping stove I'd been using for cooking. Found the first aid kit I'd assembled from the park's medical station, bandages, antiseptics, painkillers, splinting materials. When he'd calmed enough to speak coherently, I laid out the situation with brutal honesty. We've got supplies for maybe 6 months if we're careful, longer if we ration aggressively. Power's going to be an issue eventually. The propane won't last forever. The infected seem pretty stable. They're not dying off or evolving rapidly, just existing in this weird equilibrium. I don't know what's happening outside the park boundaries, if there's still a government, still a military, still anything resembling civilization. Radio's just static across all frequencies. Cell networks died in the first week. We're completely cut off. Tyler wiped his face with his sleeve, leaving wet streaks across the fabric. So we're just, what? Living down here until we die of old age or the supplies run out? We're surviving, I corrected. putting emphasis on the present tense. One day at a time, that's all I've got right now. That's all any of us has anymore. He nodded slowly, processing the reality I'd been living for months. It's more than I had yesterday. Yesterday I had nothing. Today I have you. We fell into an uneasy partnership over the following weeks, learning each other's rhythms and habits like awkward roommates thrown together by circumstance. I taught Tyler the tunnel layout, showing him the safe scavenging routes, explaining my system for marking time and managing supplies. He proved useful despite his injury, good with his hands, mechanically inclined from some background he'd had before Wonderland, able to repair equipment I'd jury-rigged with duct tape and prayers. His leg healed slowly, the bone setting crookedly but functionally under the splint he wore religiously. He'd always walk with a slight limp, but mobility returned gradually, and by week 5 of our partnership he could manage the tunnels without assistance. Having another person changed everything about existence underground. We split responsibilities naturally. Established watch rotations even though nothing had ever breached the tunnels, the practice giving us structure and purpose. Cooked actual meals instead of eating cold food straight from cans. Played cards with a deck I'd found in a break room. Talked about our lives before, carefully avoiding the topic of family, of people we'd lost or left behind or didn't know the fate of. Some wounds were too fresh to probe. Tyler had been studying engineering at State before dropping out to work at Wonderland for the summer, needing money to pay off accumulating debt. Figured I'd go back in the fall, finish my degree, get some corporate job and spend 40 years in a cubicle. He laughed bitterly at the irony. Guess tuition doesn't matter much now. Guess nothing matters except food and water and staying alive one more day. I told him about my ex-wife Rebecca, about the divorce 3 years prior that had finalized on a Tuesday afternoon in a courtroom that smelled like floor polish, about how I'd thrown myself into work because the empty apartment felt too quiet and too full of ghosts. Careful what you wish for, right? I wanted solitude. I wanted space from other people and their expectations and their demands. Now I've got all the solitude I can handle and then some. We discovered we both loved terrible action movies from the 90s. Both hated mushrooms with unreasonable passion. Both had this weird ability to quote obscure commercials from childhood. Small connections, but they mattered tremendously in that underground world. They reminded us we were people, not just survival machines operating on instinct and routine. Day 134 brought the signal that would expand our world again. Tyler found it first. A pattern of knocks echoing through the ventilation system, carrying through the metal ductwork that connected different sections of the tunnel complex. 3 rapid taps, pause, 2 taps again, repeating every few minutes with mechanical precision, coming from somewhere in the western tunnel section, beneath Frontier Junction where the Old West-themed attractions clustered. That's SOS, Tyler said immediately, his engineering background providing the context. Morse code, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, someone else is down here. Someone else who knows what they're doing. We looked at each other across the small table in Junction C7, the same calculation running through both minds simultaneously. Another person meant more mouths to feed, more variables to manage, potential conflict over resources or leadership. But it also meant knowledge, skills, possible safety in numbers, the chance to build something bigger than just 2 guys hiding in tunnels. We check it out, I decided after a long pause. Carefully, we observe before we make contact. We don't take unnecessary risks. We traced the sound through the tunnel system over the next 2 hours, following the ventilation ducts until we reached Maintenance Junction F9 beneath the Old West shooting gallery. The knocking came from behind a locked door, a storage room I'd never bothered to access because I'd assumed it held only attraction parts and maintenance equipment I didn't need. My master keycard unlocked it with a click that sounded too loud in the confined space. The door swung open to reveal a black guy in his 40s, wearing park security uniform, sitting in a nest of sleeping bags surrounded by methodically organized supplies, stacked boxes of food, gallon jugs of water, batteries arranged by size, first aid supplies sorted by type. He held a wrench in one hand, a radio in the other. The source of the knocking, he'd been tapping the casing against the metal pipe running along the wall. He stood slowly as we entered, hands visible and non-threatening, moving with the measured calm of someone trained in crisis management and conflict de-escalation. Thank God I've been making that signal for 3 days straight, rotating between 6-hour sessions to conserve energy. Thought maybe I'd imagined other people down here. His voice carried the measured calm of someone who'd dealt with emergencies before, who'd been trained to keep his head when chaos erupted. Name's David Richardson, head of park security. Well, former head, I guess. He gestured at the empty tunnels with dark humor. Not much to secure anymore except myself in this little corner of concrete. David had been underground since day one, he explained as we sat in his organized base, and his story painted a picture of coordinated collapse that made our individual survival seem almost accidental by comparison. He'd been in the main security office monitoring the camera feeds when the first reports came through over the radio, guests attacking other guests near the Ferris wheel. The situation escalating faster than anyone could process or respond to with standard protocols. He'd initiated the emergency protocols, tried to coordinate evacuation through the main gates, watched the cameras as everything fell apart in real time across dozens of screens showing different angles of the same nightmare. The feeds had captured everything. Families torn apart, ride operators abandoning their posts, the infection spreading through the crowd like ripples in water, each new victim becoming a vector within minutes. When the infected breached the security station, attracted by the radio chatter and the voices of dispatchers trying desperately to coordinate a response that couldn't possibly contain what was happening, he'd retreated to the underground monitoring room, a backup facility that most employees didn't even know existed. He'd locked himself in, sealed the reinforced door, and survived on vending machine food and water from the break room while watching the park transform through camera feeds that continued operating on backup power. "I'd been watching the camera feeds this whole time," he said, gesturing to a bank of monitors I hadn't noticed initially. 12 screens showing grainy black and white views of the park above, cycling through different camera positions every 30 seconds. Most cameras are still operational on the backup grid. The system was designed to run independently in case of main power failure. I've been documenting patterns, behaviors, everything. The camera feeds changed everything about our tactical situation. We'd been operating blind, making assumptions based on sound alone, working with incomplete information that could get us killed. Now we could observe, plan, time our surface excursions with precision instead of educated guesswork. David also brought tactical knowledge that neither Tyler nor I possessed: security protocols, emergency procedures, communication systems, crowd management theory that translated surprisingly well to infected movement patterns. "There are others," David said, pulling out a park map marked with annotations in different colored pens. "I've seen signs over the past months. Lights in tunnel sections I can't access from here. Flashlight beams visible through grates, moving in patterns that suggest human intelligence rather than random wandering. Movement in areas where the infected don't go, specifically avoiding certain sections like they know something's there. I've been tracking it systematically. I think maybe 6 to 10 other people survived underground, scattered throughout the system, isolated from each other just like we were." He spread the map across his makeshift table, pointing to marked locations. "Here, section H12 beneath the arcade. I see light fluctuations every few days, always around the same time, suggesting someone with a routine, someone maintaining a schedule. Here, section K4 under the food court. I've watched supplies move on the cameras, boxes shifting position, resources being organized in ways the infected couldn't manage. And here, section M8 beneath the main maintenance building. Definite signs of habitation, smoke from what I assume is cooking, systematic scavenging patterns. If you've ever tried to find hope in darkness, real tangible hope, not just optimistic denial, you know the feeling that hit me then. Share this with someone who needs to hear about survival against impossible odds, because mine was about to get even harder. We made the decision to find the others, to actively seek out survivors rather than waiting for random encounters. It took 3 days of planning, studying David's camera feeds to identify safe routes and optimal timing, preparing supplies for extended reconnaissance missions into tunnel sections we'd never explored. David's security knowledge combined with my maintenance expertise and Tyler's engineering background created a surprisingly effective team dynamic. We approached the search systematically, dividing the tunnel system into sectors and methodically clearing each one while leaving signs for others to follow. We developed a communication system, chalk marks on walls and specific patterns that would mean nothing to random observers, but conveyed information to anyone looking for survivors. 3 horizontal lines meant safe area, supplies available. A circle with a dot meant base location, humans present. An X meant danger, avoid this route. We left notes secured in waterproof bags at major junctions, explaining who we were, where our base was located, how to find us. Each note included David's knock pattern, the SOS signal that had brought us together, so survivors would know the message came from humans, not some elaborate trap. The search took 3 weeks of careful exploration, moving through sections of tunnel I'd never entered despite 11 years working at Wonderland. Some areas were pristine, clearly unused since the outbreak. Others showed signs of passage, disturbed dust, moved equipment, the faint smell of human occupation. We found 2 more bodies during our search. A food service worker who'd died from what looked like a heart attack in a storage closet beneath the pizza restaurant, and a young guy in his 20s who'd been infected, made it underground, and died during transformation in a utility tunnel far from any base or supplies. We gave them both burial in the flooded section beneath the haunted mansion, adding 2 more graves to Michael's lonely resting place. We found Jacob Reeves on day 158 in a section beneath the Frontier Steakhouse that I'd avoided because it required passing near a major ventilation grate where surface noise filtered down constantly. Asian guy in his 30s, former cook, who'd built a surprisingly comfortable base in the underground kitchen facility, a commercial space designed to pre-prep food before sending it topside through service elevators. He'd been living well, comparatively speaking. The kitchen connected to the main commissary through a supply tunnel, giving him access to ingredients most of us had overlooked. He'd been cooking actual meals with freshish ingredients from the walk-in freezers, maintaining something approaching normal culinary standards despite the apocalypse. I figured if I was going to survive the end of the world, I wasn't going to eat garbage, he explained while showing us his setup. Food is one of the few pleasures left. Might as well make it count. He'd been a professional chef before Wonderland, had trained at culinary school in New York before personal circumstances brought him back home to work at a theme park steakhouse. The disappointment in his voice when he talked about that trajectory hurt to hear. Dreams deferred and now rendered permanently irrelevant by global catastrophe. But his skills proved invaluable. He understood nutrition, food preservation, inventory management on a level none of us could match. Within days of joining our group, he'd reorganized our food supplies, created a meal plan that would extend our resources by months, and started actually cooking communal dinners that tasted like something other than survival. We found Marcus Cole's son, Ethan, on day 163. The discovery hit me harder than any of the others because I'd known Marcus, had worked with him, had watched him transform during those first chaotic moments topside. Finding his son alive in Section H12, the arcade basement, felt like recovering a piece of my friend. Ethan was 17, working his first summer job running the crane games and ticket redemption counter when the outbreak hit. He'd been hiding in the arcade basement for months, surviving on the candy prizes and snack food meant for redemption rewards. He was rail-thin, traumatized, barely spoke for the first 2 days after we found him, except to confirm his name and whisper questions about whether we were real or hallucinations conjured by isolation. He'd seen his father transform, had watched from the arcade's security camera feed, the same system David monitored, as Marcus attacked other workers in the employee break area. The trauma of that experience had broken something inside him. Tyler took him under his wing immediately, maybe seeing something of his own isolation reflected in Ethan's haunted eyes, maybe just needing someone to protect and care for since we'd found each other. Within a week, Ethan started speaking more, started eating regularly, started showing signs of slow psychological recovery. Having people who cared, who protected him, who gave him purpose beyond mere survival began to rebuild something inside him. Andre Williams appeared on day 169, not because we found him, but because he found us. 60s head mechanic for the roller coasters, a legend among maintenance staff for his ability to diagnose problems from sound alone and repair equipment with whatever materials were available. He'd been living in the deepest section of the tunnels, the original 1960s infrastructure that predated the modern park, ancient concrete corridors that smelled like mildew and history. He'd heard our movements, followed us back to Junction C7, and simply knocked on the door one evening while we were eating dinner. Figured I should introduce myself before you stumbled into my territory and we had an unfortunate misunderstanding, he said in a gravelly voice worn rough by decades of cigarettes. Name's Andre. I fix things. Seems like we could all use someone who fixes things right about now. He brought expertise none of us possessed. Andre understood the park's infrastructure at a level that went beyond my maintenance knowledge. He'd been there when systems were installed, knew the quirks and workarounds that never made it into official documentation. Within days, he jury-rigged an impressive generator system, rerouting power to extend our electrical capacity and reduce propane consumption by 30%. He showed us how to tap into the park's geothermal system, using temperature differentials to generate small amounts of electricity. He identified backup fuel sources we'd never known existed, buried tanks from abandoned attractions, emergency reserves in sealed storage facilities. Liam Foster was the last survivor we located on day 174. Mid-20s, former ride operator turned tunnel survivor who'd been living in Section M8 beneath the main maintenance building. He'd established his base in essentially a large closet, surviving on sheer stubbornness and a concerning amount of energy drinks he'd hoarded from supply rooms and vending machines throughout the park. He'd been doing maintenance on rides before the outbreak, had just finished a safety inspection on the Skyscreamer when everything collapsed. His background in ride systems gave him a unique perspective on the park's mechanical infrastructure, knowledge that complemented Andre's electrical expertise. 7 of us total. 7 people alive in miles of concrete tunnels beneath a theme park frozen in apocalyptic nightmare. 7 survivors who'd been isolated for months, who'd adapted to solitude, who now faced the challenge of forming a community from trauma and shared desperation. We held our first group meeting in David's camera room, the largest space we had with the most tactical value, sitting in a circle on overturned crates and maintenance stools, eating Jacob's surprisingly good vegetable stew made with canned ingredients transformed by actual culinary skill. We looked at each other with expressions that mixed relief, fear, and determination. 7 faces lit by the glow of security monitors. 7 people who'd survived the impossible now facing the question of what came next. We need to organize, David said, naturally assuming leadership with the kind of calm authority that came from years managing security teams. Establish a real community, not just individuals surviving separately. Pool our resources, divide responsibilities based on skills and abilities, create systems that can sustain us long-term rather than just day-to-day survival. How long are we talking? Liam asked, picking at his stew with nervous energy. Days, weeks, months? Are we waiting for rescue, or are we planning for this to be permanent? The radio's still static across all frequencies, I said, having checked the communications equipment in David's base daily. No broadcasts, no emergency signals, no indication there's anyone out there coordinating rescue or recovery. Either there's nothing left of civilization, or we're too isolated to receive transmissions. Either way, we plan for indefinite timeline. We plan like this is our life now. The weight of that statement settled over the group like physical pressure. Planning for indefinite survival meant accepting we might die in these tunnels, might never see the surface world restored, might spend the rest of our lives in concrete corridors lit by fluorescent bulbs and surrounded by the constant shuffling of infected feet overhead. We spent hours mapping out a comprehensive strategy that went beyond basic survival. Jacob would manage food preparation and supply inventory, using his culinary expertise to maximize nutrition and variety while extending resource longevity. Andre would maintain the generators and electrical systems, work on improving efficiency and identifying alternative power sources. David would monitor cameras and track infected patterns, maintaining security protocols and coordinating any surface excursions. Tyler and I would handle scavenging operations and tunnel maintenance using our combined knowledge of the park's layout. Liam would establish a medical station. He'd been pre-med at community college before dropping out, had enough knowledge to handle basic injuries and illness. Ethan would help wherever needed, rotating through different responsibilities to give him purpose and continue his psychological recovery. We consolidated our bases over the following week, a massive logistical operation that involved moving supplies, equipment, and personal belongings through miles of tunnels. We established 3 primary hubs connected by safe routes, marked with luminescent paint visible in darkness but invisible from surface level. Junction C7 became our living quarters, with the couch cots we'd assembled from attraction parts and personal storage for each person's belongings. David's camera room became operations center, where we held meetings, monitored the surface, and coordinated activities. Jacob's kitchen became communal dining, the heart of our small society where we gathered twice daily for meals that restored some sense of normalcy and human connection. The system worked remarkably well once we'd established routines and expectations. We fell into patterns that mimicked normal life as much as possible given the circumstances. Wake at dawn, surface dawn tracked on David's monitors even though we couldn't see it directly, maintaining connection to natural circadian rhythms. Breakfast together in the kitchen, communal meals that Jacob made special despite limited ingredients. Daily briefings in the operations room, reviewing camera feeds and planning the day's activities. Work shifts throughout the day, everyone contributing according to their skills. Communal dinner, the most important gathering where we shared stories, played games Jacob had found in park storage, maintained the social connections that kept us human. Evening downtime before sleep rotation with watch duty, even though nothing had ever breached the tunnels in all our months underground. Ethan slowly came back to life under this structure. Started talking more, contributing to conversations, laughing occasionally at Liam's terrible jokes and Andre's gruff observations about everything being built wrong in modern times. He'd seen his father turn that trauma wouldn't heal quickly or perhaps ever completely, but being surrounded by people who cared, who protected him, who gave him purpose and belonging, began to rebuild something inside him that isolation had nearly destroyed. You've stuck with me this far, and I appreciate it. Comment below about the people who kept you going during your darkest times, because community became everything to us. And hit that subscribe button. The final act of this story will test everything we built. We celebrated day 200 underground with a feast Jacob prepared using ingredients he'd been secretly hoarding for weeks. Real food, not just survival rations. Steaks from the frozen reserves, thawed and grilled on equipment he'd rigged in his kitchen. Vegetables from canned stock prepared with herbs from the restaurant supply depot. Even a cake he'd baked using industrial park kitchen equipment, decorated with frosting spelling out 200 days in shaky letters. We sat around a table we'd assembled from attraction parts, literally a table built from the demolished remains of a carousel platform. 7 people who'd been strangers 7 months ago, now bound by shared impossibility and mutual dependence. To survival, David raised a glass of purified water and a toast. To each other, Andre added, his gravelly voice carrying unexpected emotion. To tomorrow, Tyler said, squeezing Ethan's shoulder. We drank, and for a moment the weight lifted. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were living, building something that resembled community and purpose and hope. The infected still shuffled overhead. The world above remained a nightmare of mindless violence and decay. But down here in the tunnels we'd created something worth protecting. But day 212 shattered that fragile optimism. The generators started failing. Andre had warned us it was coming, had been tracking consumption rates and fuel levels with meticulous precision. But the reality still hit hard when he delivered the news during morning briefing. "We've got maybe 3 weeks of propane left at current consumption," he reported, his expression grim. "After that, we're in the dark. No heat, no hot food, no cameras, no light beyond flashlights and whatever batteries we can scavenge." The room fell silent except for the hum of monitors and the distant rumble of machinery. The camera system had become our primary security, our window to the world above, our tactical advantage that kept us safe during scavenging runs. Losing it felt like going blind and deaf simultaneously. "What about the main park generators?" Tyler suggested, his engineering mind immediately working through alternatives. The big industrial units that powered the rides and attractions, they must have separate fuel supplies, backup reserves beyond what we've been using. "They're topside," I said, already knowing where this was heading, in the power station building near the main entrance, about a quarter-mile from the nearest tunnel access point. Accessing them means significant surface exposure, extended time in the open, high risk. "Then we make that exposure count," David said firmly, switching immediately into tactical planning mode. "We plan a proper excursion, not a quick scavenging run. Full reconnaissance using cameras, optimal timing when infected activity drops to minimum levels, multiple people for safety and efficiency. We either secure additional fuel or we figure out alternative power sources before the lights go out." We spent 3 days planning the mission with obsessive detail. David mapped infected patterns on the cameras, watching feeds from dawn to dusk, tracking movement density across different times and locations. He identified a window between 4 and 5 a.m. when movement in the power station area dropped to minimum levels, never zero, but low enough to attempt access. We'd approach through Tunnel A1, which opened into the staff parking area behind the generator building, minimizing open ground exposure. 3-person team for balance between efficiency and safety, me for maintenance knowledge, David for tactical command, Tyler for mechanical expertise. Jacob would monitor cameras and provide radio updates. We'd found walkie-talkies in security storage, short-range but functional within the park boundaries. Andre would prepare to receive and install any equipment we recovered, jury-rigging whatever was necessary to integrate new fuel sources into our existing system. Day 215, 3:45 a.m. We geared up in Junction C7, checking equipment multiple times with the nervous energy of soldiers preparing for combat. Pry bars, flashlights with red filters to preserve night vision and reduce visibility to infected, empty backpacks for fuel containers or parts, 50 feet of rope, comprehensive first aid kit, 3 days of emergency rations in case we got trapped. I felt like I was suiting up for a spacewalk, preparing to exit the safety of our vessel into hostile vacuum where a single mistake meant death. "Stay tight," David briefed one final time, his security training evident in the way he ran through protocols. "Move quiet, stay low, use available cover. Any sign of trouble? We abort immediately and return to the tunnels. Equipment isn't worth lives. We can figure out alternatives if this doesn't work." We moved through Tunnel A1 in single file, our footsteps echoing softly despite our care to move silently. The tunnel stretched for over a quarter-mile, a straight shot that felt endless in the darkness. The exit hatch opened into an equipment shed behind the employee parking area, a small structure that had once stored landscaping equipment. I cracked it slowly, wincing at the slight creak despite the WD-40 I'd applied to the hinges during our last surface excursion months ago. Fresh air hit my face, the first time I'd breathed outside air in weeks. It smelled wrong in ways I couldn't articulate. Sweet rot and chemical tang, the scent of a world decomposing without human maintenance, nature reclaiming spaces we'd abandoned. The parking lot spread before us, filled with abandoned cars, some with doors still open from panicked escapes 7 months ago. Personal belongings littered the ground, purses, phones, keys, the debris of lives interrupted mid-stride. Infected wandered between vehicles in that distinctive shuffle drag, about 15 visible in the pre-dawn dimness. They moved without purpose or direction, simply existing in constant motion, bodies that had forgotten how to rest. One wore what had been a business suit, another still had a child's backpack hanging from one shoulder. The human details made it worse somehow. David tapped his watch, then pointed toward the generator building 50 yards away across open pavement. We moved in formation, staying low, using cars for cover, moving from vehicle to vehicle in short sprints. Tyler's limp slowed us slightly, but he managed placing each foot carefully to minimize sound against the pavement. A piece of glass crunched under my boot, and I froze, heart hammering. 3 infected turned their heads toward the sound, clouded eyes searching. We stayed motionless behind a minivan for 90 seconds that felt like hours. They lost interest, returned to their aimless wandering. We reached the generator building without further incident. I used my maintenance key card on the electronic lock, praying the system still functioned after months without maintenance. The light blinked green. The door unlocked with a soft click. We slipped inside, closing the door with agonizing slowness to prevent any sound that might draw attention. The interior was exactly as I remembered from maintenance checks years ago. Massive diesel generators designed to provide backup power for critical park systems, fuel tank gauges indicating reserves, control panels with switches and monitors. But someone had been here since the outbreak, recently. Supply wrappers littered the floor around makeshift bedding. A sleeping bag lay in the corner, still arranged like someone had just gotten up. Equipment had been moved, rearranged into a defensive position that suggested planning and intelligence. Food containers were stacked in organized rows, water jugs clustered near the sleeping area. "Someone's been living here," Tyler whispered, stating the obvious. A voice came from the shadows behind the generators, male and rough with disuse. "Still am, and you're in my home without invitation." We spun toward the voice, weapons raised. A figure emerged from behind the machinery. White guy, maybe mid-40s, wearing maintenance coveralls similar to mine. He held a pipe wrench in one hand and a knife in the other, both weapons raised but not immediately threatening. His eyes were clear, movements coordinated, distinctly human. But there was something feral in his posture, something that spoke of months alone and the psychological toll that isolation exacted. "Easy," David said, using his security voice, calm but commanding. "We're not infected. We're survivors from underground from the tunnel system. We're just looking for fuel, for supplies. We don't want trouble." The man laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Survivors, right. I'm surviving just fine on my own. Been doing it for 7 months without help. Don't need company now." He stepped closer, and I could see his face clearly. Gaunt, sun-starved pale despite surface living, eyes shadowed with the kind of exhaustion that went beyond physical. "Name's Roger. Roger Stevens, senior maintenance engineer. This is my territory. My supplies you want to take from me, you'll have to go through me." "We don't want to take," I said carefully, recognizing the defensive posture of someone who'd been alone too long. "We want to trade. We've got community underground, 7 people, organized supplies, safety. You're welcome to join us. But if you want to stay here, that's your choice. We just need access to the fuel reserves to keep our generators running." Roger studied us for a long moment, knife still raised, calculating odds and risks. 7 people. You're telling me 7 people survived in those tunnels? I thought I was the only one left alive in this whole damned park. "There's more than just us," Tyler added. "Maybe others we haven't found yet, but we're building something down there. Community. Not just survival, but actual living." Something shifted in Roger's expression, loneliness cracking through defensive aggression. "I haven't talked to another person since this started. Haven't heard another human voice except my own. I thought..." His voice broke. "I thought I'd die alone up here." "You don't have to," David said gently. "Come with us. See what we've built. Make your choice with actual information instead of assumptions." Roger lowered his weapon slowly, the knife dropping to his side, the wrench hanging loose. "Show me." We spent an hour in that generator building, explaining our underground community, while Roger showed us the fuel reserves, multiple large tanks that could extend our power for months, maybe a year if properly rationed. He'd been living topside, managing to avoid the infected through careful timing and intimate knowledge of their patterns. But the isolation had clearly worn on him, eroded his psychological stability in ways that showed in his jerky movements and paranoid scanning of shadows. We loaded fuel containers with diesel and propane as much as we could carry. Roger helped, his maintenance expertise proving immediately valuable as he explained the fuel systems and optimal extraction methods. When we prepared to return to the tunnels, he hesitated at the threshold of the equipment shed entrance. "I've been on the surface for 7 months," he said quietly. "Gotten used to sky, even if I only see it through windows. Going underground feels like burial." "It's not burial," I said. "It's survival. And you won't be alone." He nodded slowly and followed us into the tunnel. Integrating Roger into our community proved challenging. He'd spent too long alone, developed habits and patterns that didn't translate well to group living. He hoarded supplies in his personal area despite communal sharing agreements. He woke screaming from nightmares that disturbed everyone's sleep. He struggled with basic social interactions, standing too close or too far, unable to read normal cues. But slowly, with patience and consistent boundaries, he began to adapt. Andre took him under his wing, recognizing a fellow engineer who'd simply been isolated too long. They worked together on the generator systems, and the familiar technical language seemed to ground Roger in ways emotional appeals couldn't. The additional fuel bought us time, extended our electrical reserves by 8 months according to Andre's calculations. But it also highlighted the fundamental problem we faced. Every resource was finite. Eventually, fuel would run out, food would spoil or be consumed, water treatment chemicals would deplete. We were living on borrowed time in a tomb of our own construction. Day 250 brought a new crisis that forced us to confront that reality. Ethan got sick, fever, violent coughing, symptoms that could have been simple flu or could have been something worse. Liam set up a quarantine area in an isolated section of tunnel, treating Ethan with medications from our dwindling medical supplies. We all held our breath for 3 days while the fever raged, while Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness, while we faced the possibility that we might lose him to something as mundane as illness after surviving 7 months of apocalypse. He recovered. The fever broke on day 253, and he started eating again, regaining strength. But the incident crystallized something we'd been avoiding. We needed more than just survival. We needed purpose. We needed hope. We needed something to work toward beyond simply existing another day. "We can't just hide down here forever," Tyler said during a meeting after Ethan's recovery. "We need to start thinking bigger. Start planning for actually reclaiming the surface, or finding other survivors, or doing something other than waiting to die in the dark." "The infected are still everywhere," David countered, pulling up camera feeds showing the park packed with shuffling figures. "Thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. We're 8 people with basic weapons. What exactly do you propose we do?" "We start small," I said, an idea forming even as I spoke. "We start reclaiming spaces, one building at a time. We clear them, seal them, create safe zones. We expand our territory gradually. Maybe we never reclaim the whole park, but we create enough space to actually live instead of just hiding." The idea took root. Over the following weeks, we planned our first reclamation effort, the haunted mansion chosen because it connected directly to the tunnels through the flood storage area where we'd buried the dead. The building was large, defensible, had only limited access points. If we could clear the infected and seal the entrances, it could become a surface base, a foothold in the world above. We spent a month preparing. Andre welded metal barriers for doorways. Jacob stockpiled supplies for an extended operation. David mapped every camera angle covering the building, tracking infected patterns. Tyler and I scouted the tunnel approaches, ensuring we had escape routes if things went wrong. Liam assembled medical equipment for inevitable injuries. Roger, Ethan, and I built weapons, reinforced poles with blades, crude but effective for close combat without gunfire noise. Day 287. We executed the operation at dawn, 8 people emerging from the tunnel into the haunted mansion basement. The attraction had been closed for the season, the interior dark and smelling of artificial fog chemicals and decay. We cleared it room by room, floor by floor, a slow, methodical process that took 6 hours and left us exhausted and covered in blood that wasn't ours. 43 infected had been inside. We eliminated them with grim efficiency, working in teams using tactics David had drilled into us, lost track of individual kills, focused only on survival, on pushing forward, on clearing the next room. When we finally sealed the last entrance and stood in the main hall surrounded by bodies we dragged into a pile for later disposal, we looked at each other with expressions mixing horror and triumph. We'd done it. We'd reclaimed our first building. This is the moment everything changed for us. Share this video with anyone who's ever fought for something impossible because we were just getting started. And don't forget to like and subscribe. You've come this far, you need to see how this ends. The haunted mansion became our surface base, our foothold in the world above. We spent weeks converting it, clearing bodies, reinforcing entrances, moving supplies from the tunnels, creating living spaces in rooms designed to terrify guests. The irony wasn't lost on us that we'd made a home in a building designed to simulate fear, now serving as sanctuary from real terror outside. From that foothold we expanded, cleared the building next door, a gift shop, then the restaurant adjacent to it. Each operation got easier as we refined tactics and built confidence. We created a network of safe buildings connected by reinforced walkways, slowly pushing back against the infected territory. Other survivors found us, attracted by the activity, by signs of coordinated human action. Our community grew to 15, then 20, then 25 people. Each new survivor brought skills, knowledge, hope. We discovered the infected were finite. They didn't reproduce, didn't spawn new members. They only existed in the numbers that had been created during the initial outbreak. Every infected we eliminated was one less in the total population. The math was brutal but simple. If we eliminated them faster than we died, eventually we'd win. It took 3 years. 3 years of daily combat, of clearing buildings, of losses and injuries and psychological trauma that would haunt us forever. But we did it. We reclaimed Wonderland Park entirely, cleared every building, every midway, every corner of the 200-acre property. I'm standing on the midway now as I tell you this, 7 years after the outbreak. The park is alive again in ways that would have seemed impossible during those first months underground. 53 survivors call this place home. We've got agriculture growing in the parking lots, livestock in converted buildings, workshops producing tools and weapons. We've made contact with other survivor communities in the region, established trade routes, started rebuilding something that resembles civilization. The tunnels are still there beneath my feet, our salvation, our fortress, the place that kept us alive when the world ended. We maintain them, keep them stocked and ready, because we learned the hard lesson that safety requires preparation. But we live on the surface now, under open sky, in buildings we cleared with our own hands. Sometimes I go back down to Junction C7, sit on that couch where Tyler and I first became a community of 2. The calendar marks are still scratched on the wall, a record of days when survival seemed impossible. I trace them with my fingers and remember what we built from darkness and desperation. We didn't just survive, we reclaimed our world, one tunnel at a time, one building at a time, one day at a time. And if we could do it, trapped underground with nothing but hope and determination, maybe there's hope for anyone facing their own impossible darkness. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you that survival is possible even when everything seems lost, leave a comment sharing your own story, and share this video, because someone out there needs to hear that darkness doesn't last forever. We made it out of the tunnels. You can make it out of whatever trap you're in.